So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell if it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is over there where you guys are. How is everyone doing? I got Nestlig20 with me. Ness, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Last week I did a presentation on the photosynthesis and its evolution and its impact on the history of the Earth and life. And
Oh,
although for the most part I did well, I think. Although sometimes I stumbled over words and I was trying to get it over as quickly as possible, but it still took 3 hours to do so.
yeah.
Yeah. Next time, if I do anything like that, I will. I think I'm just going to keep it shorter or as short as possible. But yeah.
Okay. Well, we are here to take a look at the Physics of Light movie by Spirit Science, which is like an hour and a half of him talking about physics, which, I mean, that just sounds amazing. So let's just dive right into that.
Wavelengths.
The concept of light is one of those things that, if scientifically and spiritually understood, would completely change everything we think we know about the universe. And that's the real key here. It must be understood both scientifically and spiritually.
I really, really hope that he goes into detail about what a spiritual understanding of light is.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. Like, okay, I have some feeling or some understanding of what it means to have a scientific understanding of it, like testing and falsifiability. But what is the spiritual understanding of this? Like,
I mean, the only thing I can think of that you can ultimately articulate in any way that's comprehensible is the way that light is used as a metaphor for things like, you know, clarity or understanding or goodness and things like that, right? Because obviously there are clear metaphors that people use regarding light in spiritual contexts where it's pretty easy to understand what they mean, but that doesn't really involve much understanding of actual light beyond just the phenomenological human perception of it. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's also like maybe some like cultural association with good and evil and such, like or yin and yang, you know. But I don't know. Further, I don't know anything other than that. But yeah.
All right. Well, let's see.
Let's see what this say. Yeah.
Just one way or the other. Now, if we look to human history, we can see references to light in almost every ancient culture in a multitude of ways.
I mean, yeah, obviously, light is an important thing. Humans are very, very visual creatures. So
well, it's like pointing out like so many different ancient cultures have at the riverbeds have floodmits. Like, oh, you don't say.
Yeah. Or look at how many cultures thought that it was important to track the stars. Like, yeah, because you know it helps you know when to plant your crops. Like,
right.
This is pretty basic being a human kind of thing.
Dawn of religion, light itself had been intimately connected to the creation of reality. Although sun worship is used a lot as a term for pagan religions, direct worship of the big old gas ball is actually relatively rare. Although almost every culture uses solar motifs in their mythology, only a relatively few cultures, mainly Egyptian, Indo-European, and Mesoamerican ones, developed entirely solar religions.
That's actually a pretty big proportion of world cultures, because you gotta remember, Indo-European cultures cover basically all of Central Asia, West, and North of Africa. And Mesoamerican cultures dominated large sections of the New World. So, like, it's not the majority, but it's not exactly rare. Indo-European is a pretty wide brush.
If I remember correctly, like one of the most, if you look at the different pantheons of like Greek and Rome, and you go and it's like goes back to the Indo-European. You see like a god associated with the sky and a god associated with the earth, like the Mother Earth and Father Sky thing, you know.
Yep.
So yeah, it's common.
Yeah, I mean, sure, maybe outside of those areas, but those are a lot of areas. I mean,
yeah,
like you got to remember the dominant cultures in India for the past several thousand years have been Indo-European. Persia is Indo-European. I mean, Greek, Rome, Russia, all the Germanic tribes, all the Celtic tribes, all Indo-European. That's a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
But here we go.
The main thing that these cultures shared was a well-developed and urbanized society that centered around sacred kingship. In almost all of them, in one way or another, imagery of the sun as the ruler of both the upper and lower worlds that he majestically visits on his daily journey is pretty prominent. Most of these beliefs revolve around the idea that the sun, as the bestower of light and warmth, is the guardian of justice and order. They say that our divine Father upholds and gives structure to the universe. With an almost universal connection of light with enlightenment or illumination, the sun...
Wow, I wonder why anyone would have a connection between light and illumination. I can't imagine. Even the word enlightened, like, look. Okay, humans are visual creatures. When it's dark, we essentially have very limited knowledge about our surroundings. Or you. Dinosaurs are also visually oriented too, so I'll include myself, right? Because, you know, dinosaurs often have better vision than humans, so. Take that, humans. So we're all... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's also, go ahead.
So we're all very visually dominated. So, like, for instance, if you'd have, say, a bat in a pitch black cave, it's going to be able to use things like echolocation and scent and stuff like that to know about as much about its environment as it would if there were a whole string of lights in there, right? It's really not a big deal for that bat. But for a human, a pitch black cave is basically just a mystery. You have no idea what's going on. You can kind of hear things, but it's hard to pick out exactly what's happening because your ears aren't that sensitive, and there's weird echoes, and humans don't smell they're not great at smelling, and so basically humans get virtually all of their information about the world. That's an exaggeration, but they get a huge portion of the most significant information about the world from light. So when it's dark, you don't know what's going on around you. When it's light, you do. This doesn't tell us anything about the spiritual nature of light per se. It just tells us that human biology finds light to be important for gathering information. Therefore, it's easy to analogize it to things like spiritual discovery or knowledge in general.
It's just it's the simple fact of biology that made us associate light with gaining knowledge. Like, as you say, like the way we gain most of the knowledge is through our sense of sight. But
Here we go.
Ahead.
is also a great source of wisdom for us. Interestingly though, while it's taken for granted that the sun is a masculine entity, this wasn't always the case. Certainly in most Romance languages, the sun is gendered as male, like Le Soleil in French, El Sol in Spanish, and Il Sole in Italian.
All right, so one thing is that it's actually not primarily a matter of like personhood that gives objects like this a gender, right? So the thing is, in most languages with a gender system that is not a natural gender system, whereby words primarily are assigned to gender categories based on some inherent property of the object itself, and most gender systems in languages are more or less arbitrary. The dominant factor is actually the sound of the word. So
I guess this is a strange thing. Like, I have heard the argument that the Bible contains divine knowledge because it refers to ants as females.
Yeah, in fact, the word for ant in Hebrew is just feminine.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't. There isn't a deliberate choice to refer to ants that way. I've also heard that claim. But so, yeah, in most languages, whether or not something ends up being masculine or feminine will be determined primarily by the sound of the word. In fact, even if that overrides in some cases the natural seeming gender. So, for instance, German is famous for having some words that you would think refer to something that should be feminine or masculine, but instead it doesn't use the expected sex. So, for instance, the word for girl in German sounds like a neuter noun in German, and over time it has become a neuter noun. So the word for girl in German is neuter rather than feminine. Why? Because it sounds like it should be. And that's
also,
more important.
Someone in the chat says Indo-Europeans didn't start out civilized. Directed at you, but
I mean,
yeah.
That's true for any group you care to name.
But yeah.
civilization had a start point, and before that point, in any given location, no one there was civilized. But yeah, so this whole connection of it to this is it's spurious at best. But sure, Jordan, lots of languages. Also, notice these are all just Italian languages.
Oh yeah, it's actually basically one and the same if you go back far enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
Latin basically. Yeah.
So, I mean, did he pick up, say, Sanskrit? Nope. Did you check on any non-Indo-European languages? Did you check on Semitic languages, Jordan? Did you check on, say, well, I was going to say Sino-Tibetan, but they generally don't have very strong or any gender systems.
Weren't the
But
Japanese gods about like the wind and sun all female? Or I'm mistaken.
actually, the sun goddess, I believe there's a female sun goddess in Japanese myth. Let me double check that.
I'm an anime fan. Like I think it's Amaterasu,
Yep.
the god of the sun. Yeah.
Yep, she is in fact the goddess of the sun. So
Yeah.
I guess you know what, Japanese doesn't count. Forget those guys.
Yeah.
But in Germanic languages, the sun is generally given a feminine status,
okay,
as
maybe
in
he did check.
the German die Sonne. The reason for this distinction isn't all that
All right, I'm not an expert at German, but I'm pretty sure that e at the end of that word isn't silent in German.
I don't think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and people are pointing out Amaterasu. Look, here's the thing. I've put my foot in my mouth about Japanese mythology before because I am not very familiar at all with it. So I'm always a little bit hesitant to just come out and say anything about it because I can't say I usually get it wrong, but I have gotten it wrong before.
clear, as the Proto-Indo-European root from which a lot of these languages derive had the word sunno as an inanimate gender. In fact, in Proto-Indo-European mythology, the sun appeared to be multi-layered, manifesting as a goddess, but also perceived as the eye of the sky father, Dias. In more modern New Age circles, the sun, and by extension, light itself, is also the life-giving source that provides the nourishing spirit which brings life to the whole planet.
I mean, that's kind of, if you get rid of all the weird mystical, parts of that, it's the life-giving spirit that nourishes the life force of the world, like whatever. But I mean, the sun is the source of most of the energy that life on Earth uses.
Yeah.
Because-
It's also a bit coincidental that last week I talked about photosynthesis and a bit explaining this, but yeah, it's in a way it's true, but like it's are you familiar with the term deepity, or maybe I'm pronouncing it incorrectly? Like it's a term referring to a statement that sounds profound, but when in a true sense, it actually is not profound. Like you are what you eat is a deepity statement. Like technically it's true, but in a way it's meaningful, it's not really true. But yeah.
Right, like that just sounded like a really profound statement. But what it really means is, so primary producers in the environment use light to produce energy, and then other things eat them.
Yeah.
That's where the energy comes from. Oh, and apparently Venerable checked on the Proto-Indo-European, and it is not Sunno.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So no surprise there that once again Jordan gets the etymology wrong. However, my Proto-Indo-European is not good enough to catch him out on all those. But I don't know if you saw last week, Nestle, but there was a lot of nonsense etymology from Jordan.
I missed that. Sorry.
No worries.
Thus, the energy of the sun is the same energy that is at the source of our life essence. It's often described that God, Source, Allah, Brahma, or any of these words is either light, or perhaps that from this spirit, light is the first thing to emerge. If we were to look,
Usually it's the first thing to emerge. There are various bits in scriptures where various of those entities are called light, but it's usually some kind of a metaphor because they're also usually said to have created light. So, but that's not really a huge deal. I'm not here to tell you not to call whatever deity you would prefer to worship light. Do whatever you want there.
to Gnostic philosophy, to name but one school of thought, it is said that our true selves are beings of light that can eventually be liberated. Our day-to-day choices and the degree to which we awaken to truth from illusion will either prevent or allow us to become a living embodiment of the light that we are inside. Now, when talking about light, this brings up the subject of visible light, electromagnetic radiation, and quote-unquote spiritual light.
I want to know what part of the electromagnetic spectrum is spiritual light.
I like it's a bit funny that he uses quote unquote spiritual light as if he was being sarcastic, but he's actually being literal, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So why are you using quote unquote? Okay, all right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Let's see what he has to say on quote unquote.
We need to make this
spiritual light.
distinction right off the bat because a question must be asked. What even is light? Believe it or not, that question is actually way harder to answer than you might think.
I mean, light is composed of photons, which themselves are local excitements of the electromagnetic field in space.
Yeah.
Which the electromagnetic field is a field that pervades all of space-time, and it can have different energy levels at certain points within it, and that's what we call a photon. So, now, for literally everything, you can get down to the point where you say, well, what's that? What's that? What's that? It's just like a kid asking why, right? You can say, what's the electromagnetic field? And I can explain fields. And then you can say, okay, and then for every single part of my definition, you can say, what's that? So when we're talking about light, we are getting close to the limit of what we can say things are, because eventually we get to things where we're just like, it's just a fundamental part of the universe. It's not composed of anything else. But yeah, that's what light is. We know what light is.
Generally speaking, light is defined as a form of electromagnetic radiation that's
Generally speaking, no, that's what it's always defined as, Jordan.
within the portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that we can see with our physical eyes. In other words, light is electromagnetic radiation that has a wavelength of about 400 to 700 nanometers. So basically anything in between infrared and ultraviolet on the electromagnetic spectrum. In physics though, the word light can also sometimes mean EM radiation of any wavelength, not just the visible ones, in case you thought we had it easy.
Well, I mean, he's right. All of that is fundamentally the same kind of thing, right? Like radio waves are still just photons, as are infrared light. Like, that's not wrong. Although he's saying it as if there's some kind of like mystery involved.
You might get to the issue of like, oh, if a tree fell over in the forest and nobody is there, would it make a sound? Like, okay, it depends on how you define sound. Like, if you define sound as a sensation of hearing, then no, of course. But yeah, it's maybe that. But yeah, it's like it depends on how you define light. Like, if you define light as only what you can see, then yeah, it's only the visible part of the spectrum. But I think we can go ahead and see what he has to say about that.
So before we can talk about light, let's ask a deeper question. What is electromagnetic radiation? Well,
we already covered it, but I want to hear what he has to say.
Put it simply, it's the waves, or rather their quanta, a fancy word for absolute minimum amount, of the electromagnetic field moving through space carrying electromagnetic energy. And in that case, what is the electromagnetic field? That one is simple enough, right? It's just a classical, i.e. non-quantum field. And by the way, field is just multiple points in space-time that are represented by a number produced by moving electrical charges. So, at the risk of meeting Alice this far down the rabbit hole, let's ask the last big question. What is electrical charge? The short answer, if you were to ask a physicist, would be, it's just a property of matter. But
I mean, it is. And you're getting, like we said, you're getting to a point where you're at fundamental aspects of the universe, right?
Yeah.
And saying, what is it? And asking what it's composed of stops making sense all the time, right? Some things just are what they are, and there doesn't seem to be any deeper level beyond it.
Of course, there are people who want to go even further, like string theory, I think, right? So like some form of universal a theory of everything, but
yeah,
but of course, Jordan is probably going to propose something that has no basis in reality, but yeah.
What, Jordan have no basis in reality? Oh, come on now.
what does that even mean? Well, the electromagnetic forces are one of the fundamental forces of physics. So,
hold on, did he say forces? Well, okay, so then he said it's are one of the fundamental forces. So I'm just going to go ahead and chalk that up to just a slip of the tongue.
Yeah.
Okay, so he should have caught it in editing, but like, okay, I'll let that one go because, yeah, I think he's not talking super nonsense yet.
electrical charge is really one point where everything begins.
What? Electrical charge is one point where things begin? Did I just hear that? I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. Yeah, but
I have to hear
I
that
don't know
again
what it
because
means. Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe that's not what he said.
Answer, if you were to ask a physicist, would be, it's just a property of matter. But what does that even mean? Well, the electromagnetic forces are one of the fundamental forces of physics. So electrical charge is really one point where everything begins.
No, electrical charge is
I
one point
think-
where everything begins. That doesn't even make sense.
Like I think like he was referring to like electromagnetism is one of the fundamental forces of the universe, and therefore, if it's fundamental, it is part of the beginning. At least, like I'm trying to make sense of what he's saying, but I'm struggling, of course. But yeah,
Yeah, no, that's look, electrical charge. So like he said, the field, electromagnetic field, is a scalar field, right? So it doesn't have directionality to it, but every point in the field has a measurable number associated with it. Now, there's a baseline where there's no particular excitation either way, which you can measure for any local area. And you can call that 0, right? Charges that are negative, you can apply a negative number to, and ones that are positive, you can apply a positive number to. Now, which side of that equation we decided to call negative and positive is just an accident of history, right?
Yeah.
Another civilization could use the exact opposite convention, and their math would come out just fine as well.
we could live in a universe or live in a history of humanity where we have called protons, negatrons, and electrons, something else maybe. Yeah.
Right. We could call them positrons, and then our, what we think of as positrons could just be anti-positrons or something. Like it.
Right.
Which one is negative and positive is arbitrary, but the convention we have as modern science is that electrons have a negative charge and positrons, but protons have a positive one, right?
Also, if I'm not mistaken, the electromagnetism didn't really wasn't really at the beginning. Like it was unified with the weak force, right? Before the inflation.
Yeah, the electro-weak force was a thing, and you can still sort of reunite them in really high energy particle accelerators.
Right.
But as it stands now, the electromagnetic field can have these excitation levels, both on either ends of a 0 point, right? They can go up or down from 0. And one of the things about this kind of field is that it prefers to be at the lowest available energy state, which means it prefers to be at that 0 point. And so areas of positive and negative charge like to meet up and cancel out on net, because over a significant area, the difference in excitement both up and down end up evening out. So, yeah, that's what's going on. It's not the beginning of anything. It's certainly not a point. The electromagnetic field occupies all points because it's a field. That's what fields do.
Mm-hmm.
You could even say that as a fundamental force, charge is one of the defining aspects of physics.
Charge isn't a force. Holy crap. Charge is how you measure degrees of electrical potential in the electromagnetic force, right? So charge, if you're someone who's familiar with electrical stuff, like electrical engineering, or you're an electrician or anything like that, the amount of charge you have is essentially the voltage you have, right? So for instance, when we measure charge in quantum mechanics, we measure it using electron volts. An electron volt is just how much negative charge an electron has. Now, in many cases, you might measure in like mega electron volts if you're talking about, like a computer system or something that's operating on a nearly quantum scale. Because right now, computers are at the point where if we make them much smaller, quantum mechanics is going to start making them just kind of break. So we don't. But yeah, that's what voltage is. It's not a force. Voltage on its own doesn't make anything happen. You have to have things like force carriers and a connection between things. And yeah, like electromagnetic charge isn't a force. Just there you go.
And therefore our universe. But that doesn't explain what it is. What does it mean for an electron to have a negative charge and a proton to have a positive one?
Well, it means they're just opposite amounts of excitation away from 0. That's all it is.
We are one step ahead every time.
Right. So
yeah.
Think about it like this. Imagine, so like the rubber sheet idea for gravity?
Yeah.
Well, gravity is another field, right? You have the gravitational field, and it is a vector field. But think about it like this. Let's say you have a sheet of rubber, and you can push on it from either side. Now, let's say it's just out in space, right? So there's no objective up or down that you can look at, but there is an objective surface to the sheet of rubber. And you can put your fist on either side, and so you put one fist on each side in different locations, and you push. Now, from whichever side of the sheet you look at, you have two excitations in this model field, one going one way and the other going the other way. And so you can just arbitrarily decide which side of the sheet you want to call the top, and then you can say the thing that is pushing up is positive and the thing pushing in is negative, and there you go.
Yeah. It's also maybe a better analogy will be like your left and the right hand, like, oh, we call a left hand the left hand and the right hand, but we could just easily decide, oh, let's call the left hand the right hand and the right hand the left hand, and it would be functionally no different.
Yeah.
The truth is, we don't quite know for sure. No one does. Subatomic particles acquire their charge through balancing out polarities in quantum processes that we're still studying. But all we can really say with any certainty is
balancing out polarities? I mean, no.
Word salad?
What is that? Yeah, that's just word salad. I mean, charged particles do have a dipole moment, and they will align themselves in terms of polarity in magnetic fields, but they don't have to balance out their... I don't even know what it means to balance out the polarity of like an electron or a proton. That's... Yeah.
that if charge exists and works like we describe it does, then everything seems to work out and be self-consistent and explain/predict so much. Even though that
Yeah, that's kind of the point of science.
Every polarity was balanced out until the Fire Nation attacked.
doesn't prove charge is real, it makes it way more likely that it is than it isn't.
What do you mean? It doesn't mean that charge is real. Look, okay. If you want to find out if charge is real, Jordan, and this is only for Jordan if he ever watches this, don't any of you try this. I only want Jordan to try this. Take a D battery and put your tongue across both leads. If charge isn't real, you won't feel anything. Make sure it's a new battery, though. No old batteries. That's my recommendation for Jordan, and it's my recommendation that everyone else not do this. Trust me, it's a bad idea.
The big problem really comes down to a science versus philosophy kind of deal. Charge is a fundamental part of a universe.
First, I want to point out, there is no such thing as science versus philosophy. Science is a branch of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a particularly,
it's a form of applied philosophy, maybe. It depends.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But it's actually a branch of philosophy that takes considerable liberties with its epistemology. For instance, from a strictly logical standpoint, deductive reasoning has trouble actually being justified, as does empiricism.
Yeah.
But science is just like, yeah, we're just going to do it anyway. I mean, okay.
It's basically like there are some questions that philosophers worry about, but the science are like, well, we're just going to assume these fundamental problems, and then we're just going to do this to figure out the universe, how the universe works, as best as we can with our ape minds. But yeah,
I like this from the Nova Saber. Is charge real? The answer will shock you. Yeah, this is accurate. All right, here we go.
One of the building blocks of all things. But sooner or later, we just have to accept the fundamental forces as fundamental and don't question why they're there. We just study and experience them. The exact nature of...
No, I mean, find out. Look, if you just assume they're fundamental, then you're never going to find out if they actually are or not. Keep investigating. But be open to the possibility that the answer, what are they, is just that they're fundamental. That might just be the thing.
Yeah, we call like the... like for example, the standard model of physics, where we have like the quarks and the gluons and such. Like we call those fundamental particles, and we like in that model is basically assumed that that's all there is, and there is nothing further. Like the particles have no inherent size. But of course, there are still, as I mentioned before, there are still people trying to dig deeper into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charge is one of the big mysteries of the universe, and some of the greatest minds are still confused and discussing
The
it today.
greatest minds.
Oh, goodness.
Elon Musk.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, look. Elon Musk is a guy who's good at buying companies and then pretending he started them. That's what Elon Musk is. Every single idea that Elon Musk has come up with on his own has been just absolutely dumb and moronic.
Right.
Like, Elon Musk has no good ideas besides
Be careful.
buying
You're going to piss off Musk fans in the chat.
I don't care. Look, it's time to face reality, everyone. Elon
Yeah.
Musk isn't a genius. He's a dick who buys companies, pretends he started them, kicks out the original founders, and then usually runs them into the dirt after a few years. Also, you know that Tesla he shot into space? That wasn't his Tesla. He stole that Tesla from the founder of Tesla, with whom he had a contract saying that that guy would get the first Tesla off the factory line. Yay! Yeah, he shot a stolen Tesla into space.
While we don't know exactly how to define it apart from calling it a property of matter, we do know a lot about how it behaves. We know that protons and electrons are bearers of charge that help bind and hold the universe together. Like gravity, it's one of the fundamental forces of nature. Coming back to light though, when physicists talk about the speed of light, they're actually talking about the speed of electromagnetic radiation in a vacuum. When a
I mean, yeah, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Of course, the speed of light is actually more fundamental than just electromagnetism. For example, the speed at which gravitational waves travel through the fabric of the universe is also at the speed of light. So it's a fundamental property of space-time.
Yeah, it's
and well, of course, that's much more technical. I don't blame Jordan for not going deeper than that, but yeah.
well. Here's the thing: I do, because he's trying to put out a video about physics. So he should be getting the physics dead on.
Yeah.
Now, if he wants to simplify it for the sake of ease of listener, that's okay, but he needs to say that that's the case, right?
Yeah, but I want to say, like, my correction is basically like saying, like, oh, the Earth is round. No, the Earth is a spheroid. Like, it's the difference doesn't make much. Yeah, but yeah. Anyway, let's continue. I think.
Oh, Rodin, last name says use a 9 volts. Could be hard to stretch your tongue across a D. Well, dinosaurs have. Well, Ceratosaurus has a particularly large tongue. So I'm always thinking in terms of, like, I have like a 2/3 of a meter long skull, right?
You need a big battery for that.
Yeah, I'm not used to thinking in terms of you little scurrying mammals. I guess you're climbing mammals mostly. Whatever.
particle with an electromagnetic charge oscillates or accelerates.
Oh, this is off topic, but I once again heard a creationist point out a recent article that said that Lucy, the nickname for specimen AL288-1 of Australopithecus afarensis, like, oh, what was Lucy doing in a tree? Because a paper said that she died falling out of a tree. And it's like, I don't know, but you notice humans climb trees, right? Like, being in a tree is not really significant in terms of taxonomy.
Yeah.
It just annoys me. Sorry. It's completely apropos of nothing.
It disturbs the electromagnetic field and sends out waves of energy. The wavelength of the radiation can be determined by how much energy is sent out by the charged particle.
I don't like how he phrased that. It's like, it can be determined by. I mean, it basically is the same thing, right?
Yeah.
There's a 1-to-1 correlation between a given wavelength and a given amount of energy carried by a photon. Photons of a particular wavelength have a particular energy.
It's an inverse relationship. The longer the wavelength, the lower the energy, and the shorter the wavelength, the bigger the energy. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a little weird to say that, like, oh, you can determine it by, but I guess. Yeah, it's just I just don't like how it's phrased. It's not wrong. It's just a weird way to phrase it.
So in other words, the longer the wavelength, the smaller its frequency, how fast it
You're not
bounces
even
down,
wrong,
and the less
Jordan.
dangerous it is to us. While the opposite is true for higher frequency radiation with shorter wavelengths. The wavelength of EM waves can be as long as a football field in the case of radio waves, or shorter than an atom in the case of gamma waves, which may or may not turn you into a giant green hulking ball of anger.
No, it definitely won't. It will just kill you.
Yeah.
I guarantee.
It depends on the dose, but yeah, if big enough, large enough dose.
It will go from nothing to severely harming you to killing you.
Yeah.
So yes, it does depend on the dose, like everything. But at no dose will it turn you into a Hulk. Yeah. When will we get to a spiritual light? That's a good question.
Now, to discuss spiritual light, on the other hand,
oh, here we
we
go.
must allow for the
There we
awareness
go.
that if all things come from a source, and light is the first creation, then there may be a fundamental unity at the heart of the science and spiritual perspectives here.
I don't even know what that was. Just word salad.
Yeah, light wasn't the first creation, I think, right? It's like,
Well,
or at
so
least, yeah. Mm.
during like the earliest epoch after the Big Bang, or after the initial instance of the Big Bang, it's not clear whether or not all the fundamental forces were united, and what we would call the force carriers and various particles that would have existed, we don't know. But we do know that it wouldn't have been matter; it would have been energy, and so it would have, all of those particles would have been kind of zooming around at light speed. So it's not clear what to call them really. So yeah, I don't know.
Spiritual light is really just light from a spiritual perspective, and sometimes
So it's just light.
All right.
Okay, sure, Jordan. That's really disappointing, but sure.
described as
It's like you look at a donut from one perspective. Oh, it's a circle with a hole, and from another perspective, it's a cylinder. Entirely different.
Yeah.
From different perspective. Yeah.
Or you could look at it from all of the valid perspectives and realize it's a torus.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I know Jordan likes toruses, so, or tori, depending on how Latin you want to be. That's why I put them in the thumbnail for this.
source energy. This would be light or energy that we may not even be able to measure, but which is a part of the underlying fabric of reality.
Okay, hold on. If we can't measure it, then it's not light, because we know what light is. It's electromagnetic radiation, and we have detectors that can measure light at all available wavelengths, right?
Mm-hmm.
And only some of them are short enough that they can meaningfully interact with humans. In fact, many of the ones that we can measure can't meaningfully interact with humans. For instance, humans, biologically speaking, have no capacity to interact with radio waves. Not just because we lack the anatomy, we're fundamentally the wrong size. Radio waves don't notice things as small as humans, so they can't interact with them meaningfully. And yeah, we can still measure them. Oh, and one for null for $2 says, "Am I late?" You are a bit late. You're about 37 minutes into the show. But, I mean, it's Jordan. Jordan basically doesn't even have context. It's just one nonsense statement after another. So anyway.
Also, but he did skip some of the beginning on the true scientific light, but now we are getting into the meat of spiritual light. So
right.
He did come at the right time, in a way.
Right. But, so in summation, if you can't measure spiritual light, then it's not light seen from a spiritual perspective. It's just not anything that we can verify is there. So either spiritual light is light looked at from a spiritual perspective, in which case we could measure it, or it seems really similar to just not existing.
As it relates to us personally, it also may relate with the light of our own awareness, the light of consciousness.
One for null. I believe that you're the only one who can retract messages, and I do see that your super chat was retracted. So maybe you misclicked something. That's the only thing I can think of, because if it had been hidden by a mod or something, it wouldn't show up as message retracted. It would show up as one for null hidden, so I don't know. Sorry about that.
As we mentioned earlier, in many cultures, the sun was representative of this understanding, both the light giver and the life giver. It is the nucleus.
What is this from? This looks like it's from some horrible B movie. If anyone knows what this is from, tag me in the chat and let me know, because I'm extremely confident that Jordan did not shoot this footage and do this post-production stuff himself.
Mm-hmm.
Of our solar system and was seen as the light of God. In fact, in the Hermetica, Hermes explains that the sun is the visible representation of the invisible, omnipresent superconsciousness that we call God. Now, most spiritual understandings hold that God entirely cannot be truly and fully comprehended by us because of how supremely infinite and perfect this power is.
I mean, that does kind of make sense. If something were powerful enough and intelligent enough to be the eternal creator of the universe, if it were something that a mortal being could comprehend fully, that would be kind of disappointing, right?
Well, maybe.
I would find it disappointing. I would be like, really, that's it?
Well, I've heard that some make the argument that God is actually the simplest thing that can ever be. Like,
well, by simple,
yeah.
because I'm familiar with those statements theologically, and usually by simple they mean not containing parts.
Okay.
So, which you could say that in that case, like the electromagnetic field is simple because it doesn't have subset parts; it just exists. Whereas I say a car is not simple because it has individual parts that you have to put together to make a car. So I do think it's not fair to use that extremely technical term "simple" and then refer to it as being easy to understand. I don't think that it means simple in that same way.
Oh,
Okay.
Hermes writes that the imperfect and impermanent cannot easily apprehend the eternally perfected, but the power through which God creates is source, unified, and potential energy. This is explained by the tree of life with the
Wait, unified or potential energy? Okay, so potential energy is a thing, right?
yeah.
I don't know what unified energy is. Might say that it's something like, oh, that's the source from which at some point we might be able to unify all the fundamental forces into one, which would be it's sort of like a current holy grail in particle physics is can we unify all the forces and give it a single equation for all of them. But potential energy is energy that's derived from the position of objects, right? So the one that most people are familiar with is gravitational potential energy. So you hold something up off the ground, and it has the potential energy that you can calculate based on its mass, the force of gravity, and its distance from the ground. When you release it, that potential energy starts converting into kinetic energy, and so it starts to accelerate as more of the potential energy is converted into kinetic energy. And then once it lands, it generally transfers all of that energy ultimately into thermal energy, which is one of the reasons why, say, a pool at the bottom of a waterfall is warmer than the water at the top of the waterfall. Because,
Also, some of the energy gets converted into like the shock waves in the ground.
yeah, but even
Into
that
some material,
tends,
yeah.
as those dissipate, though, they're turning into thermal energy.
Oh, yeah.
So eventually it all just goes to thermal energy. But there are other kinds of potential energy. So for instance, when you compress a spring and it has that tension energy, that's another kind of potential energy.
Yeah.
You can also have electrical potential energy, where you have, say, a bunch of charge-carrying particles of a particular charge in one area building up a voltage. They have electrical potential. That's why we call it potential, because once you connect the circuit, then the charge carriers are going to start to flow to equalize out that potential energy. So
you also put energy in potential energy in your fuel in your car.
Right, that's a chemical potential energy, right?
Yeah.
So there are lots of different kinds of potential energy, but it's not some kind of mystical thing. It's just an energy that's essentially sort of stored as a result of some physical configuration of the system. So, yeah, I don't know. And look, guys, I know that there's some questions about Hermeticism. I don't know to what degree I want to get into Hermeticism because it's a religious philosophy, and I don't know. It feels kind of off topic, but I mean, I guess let me know in the comments or something if you think you would like me to do a whole lot more research on Hermeticism and talk about it a little bit. I guess I could. I don't know a whole lot about Hermeticism. I know a bit.
Also, do you pronounce Thoth as Thoth or Thoth?
I usually go Thoth, but I'm not going to correct anyone on that because
Right.
it's a Greek transliteration of an Egyptian word. So like by the time it gets to English, who cares how you pronounce it really? Because I know that Jordan here says Thoth. I usually say Thoth.
Tomato.
Yeah, exactly. It's who cares?
initial three Sephirot. Keter, unified potential oneness, Okma, the emanation of raw creative source energy, and then Bina, which takes and structures the potential energy into forms that can be molded into whole universes.
Okay, so now we're conflating Kabbalistic practices with Hermeticism. And I just want to point out Hermeticism is considerably older, and it is primarily a sort of Greco-Egyptian syncretic philosophy, whereas Kabbalah is a Jewish set of mystical practices and beliefs. And the authentic Hermetic texts don't talk about Kabbalistic themes because the Kabbalah was created like centuries after the actual Hermetic texts, like from the Corpus Hermeticum. The only Hermetic text that I can think of, or even purported to be Hermetic text that I can think of, that is contemporaneous to some aspects of Kabbalah is if you take the younger date for the origination of the Emerald Tablet of Thoth. That's the only way I can think of there being any contemporaneity between anything that's commonly understood as being classically hermetic and anything to do with the Sephiroth. So this is just mixing and matching whatever kind of mystical stuff Jordan feels is going to be fun for him.
Of course, many New Age traditions suggests that because God was so perfect, unified, and whole, it had to create worlds of separateness and finiteness in order to explore the limits of its creative power. And so all the planes of existence were created, and as this happened, the emanations and experiences of each one.
I want to know what a plane of existence is. Jordan likes to talk about this, but like it doesn't refer to any multiverse theory that you're getting coming out of science. So yeah, I just want to know what he means by that.
Became more and more separate in nature until it arrived at this physical dimension, aka here. All around the world, there's an idea that is widely known called enlightenment.
Oh, look, who wants to bet? Okay, here we go. Ready? 1 in the chat if you think that Jordan is about to commit an etymological fallacy. Either he's going to pretend that it has more to do with the that the reality of the word, as what it really means, has more to do with the etymology than it does. Or if you think he's going to get the etymology wrong, that's a 1. 2 in the chat if you think he's going to neither use an etymological fallacy, nor is he going to give the wrong etymology. So let's see what the chat says. Because, I mean, I would put in 1. I think he's about to say something stupid. Yeah, we're getting some 1s.
We already have like 10 1s for vulnerable bead.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine that this is about to be good. Yeah, okay. We got a lot of 1s. I mean, Jordan is already well known to be really, really bad at etymology. I don't think he's gotten 1 right yet. But let's see what we get.
To be enlightened is a process of divine awakening to your true spiritual nature.
Is it? Or is it just learning stuff that you didn't know and that was previously mysterious? See, that's the thing.
2 + 2 = 4. I'm enlightened.
Well, the thing is that technically, yeah, if you didn't know that before, you've now been enlightened to new mathematical realities. Enlightenment doesn't have to just be, like, when you say, oh, someone's enlightened generally, then yeah, you're usually talking about some kind of spiritual journey, like, you know, that, like the one that, say, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, is supposed to have undergone, right? Okay, but also you can use the word enlightenment to basically just mean learning new stuff.
To become more aware of a greater understanding of truth, or even completely aware, if that's even possible. Enlightenment is often described like shining a light on old belief systems and self-identifications, mounting to higher and higher levels of inner and outer truth.
Right, because of the metaphorical association between light and knowledge that we already went over, because humans are very visual. This is not profound, Jordan. The fact that metaphor exists in language is not a profound statement.
Here's an example. On our planet, we had a movement that took place a few hundred years ago called the Industrial Revolution. We harnessed the power of machines and became conditioned to a lifestyle where we worked with them 9 to 5 and built a mighty modern empire of cities and technology. But in the process, we became slaves to our own systems. To be fair, in the ages before the Industrial Revolution, people were often slaves to their farms in order to survive.
So you traded out subsistence farming, which couldn't support as many people at as high a standard of living, and you traded it out for industrialization, which was able to feed more people and give them a marginally better standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I mean, I guess you could say it's trading one form of slavery to another, but ultimately I think it comes down to this. Nature does not provide all that is necessary for humans to survive without them needing to do something to get resources, right? You're not a slave to nature because it does not simply provide all of your needs for you free of labor. And that is the situation that we are all in. At a fundamental level, in order for you to survive, labor is required of someone somewhere. Now, if you try to force other people to do it for you against their will, then I would say you are the one enslaving them. But however,
Right.
If you notice that you need to work to survive, that's not you being enslaved. Now, if you happen to live in a society where people will let you not work and survive because they'll be charitable towards you, okay, that's fine. I guess you can get away with it, then go for it. Whatever. But yeah, you're not enslaved by the necessity of labor for your survival. That's just how it is. Slavery is a thing that people do to each other. And it's a thing that they do using coercion and lack of consent.
You know, it wasn't that much different, but it was also wildly different. Either way, for all of its faults, the Industrial Revolution was the creation of something new for us, and it propelled us forward technologically into an entire new era of being. What then
Oh yeah, Marx is now mad at me. Darn it. Well, I'll tell you what, Marx, come get me.
happened was that our school systems adopted the
Well, I don't think
same
Marx has any.
ultimate.
Marx has a problem with the industrial, and of course, some aspects of it, but like industrializing by itself, technology not right. I don't want to imagine that.
No, he didn't have a problem with technology per se. In fact, one thing that people forget is that one of the things that the Soviet Party used to gain power was the promise to electrify the countryside. Now, by this, they did not mean to go around electrocuting everyone. What they meant was that they were going to bring electricity to the countryside. And to be fair, when they took power, that was a big project that they started. It didn't really ever get completed to this day, because there are still parts of, say, the Russian Federation where the countryside doesn't have electricity. But, you know.
Yeah. Also, somebody in the live chat says, we are all born into slavery by being born heterotrophs.
Yeah, there you go. That's true. Yeah. Sorry, heterotrophs, you're all slaves to the fact that you need to eat other things.
You're all slaves to photosynthesis.
Yep.
To condition our children from a young age to get them into the 9-to-5 system as well, because that was the reality that they were growing up into. At the time, it was the right thing to do, because that's what we did. And today we are now realizing that the system naturally has its flaws and needs refinement and transformation. We are collectively seeing that this system is conditioning our children to become cogs in the wheels of civilization rather than illuminated creators who are raised to participate fully in their lives and follow their dreams.
Okay, I want to point something out. For most of human history, it took almost 2,000 calories worth of energy to gather 2,000 calories worth of food, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's only in the very modern times when someone could reasonably survive off of less than a full day's labor for like 6 to 7 days a week. So it's not so much that it was wrong or something to have people working long hours. It's just that there weren't many other options that would result in a population that could survive. Now you could say, oh, but the people making like textiles in the textile mills didn't need to work that long in order to survive because, you know, they're not producing food. But that's the thing. Everyone needs to wear these clothes, including the farmers, in which case you really need things like working clothes. And
although I did have, maybe it's a wrong article or something, but some time ago I seen an article that argues that the hunter-gatherer societies have more free time than some industrialized societies where you work from 9 to 5, 5 days a week or something.
They do actually. However, they also have much less food security.
Right.
So you're basically, by engaging in farming and agriculture generally, you are trading in more work on average for less unreliable food supply. So during good times, you're still going to have to work more than a hunter-gatherer will. However, on the hard times, you're less likely to starve. And apparently, many human societies found that to be a favorable trait. They would rather work more and not starve than have a higher chance of starving and work less. So basically what we're seeing now is just the rise of the realization that people don't actually have to work that long in order to survive because, you know, and maybe we don't have to make them. But it wasn't like there was an option in the early industrial history as to whether or not you were going to be working at least 8 hours a day. That was how we were sustaining population growth. And the invention of newer, better machines and technology means that it takes now less human labor to produce the same amount of stuff people need, which means people on a total don't have to work as hard or as much. Thanks technology, which again, Marx wouldn't be angry at me for.
One of the biggest issues with the current education system at the moment is that the curriculum is designed around teaching menial tasks and basic memorization of information. And
I find that that's less true, but I'm not sure. Actually, no, this is a pretty recent upload from Jordan. So the thing is, that has been a big part of education for a while, but education, I think, is significantly shifting onto understanding underlying principles. That's actually a big part of the goal behind, in the US, the Common Core mathematical curriculum. Now, I'm not a teacher. I'm not an expert on teaching kids, so I'm not going to sit here and critique or whatever the various new curricula for things like math and whatnot. But that is the stated goal, is to make kids better at understanding what's happening rather than just having, multiplication tables memorized by rote.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that memorization has been a big part of schooling. And there are benefits to memorization. For instance, if you're learning a new language, some of that's going to have to involve memorization, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a good idea to teach kids new languages. I think kids should come out of school with at least a rudimentary grasp on a second language. You should be able to have a conversation in at least one other language when you get out of school. And not just because it's handy to speak other languages. It's handy for you to help flex your ability to think in new ways. You will be better at problem solving if you can do the problem solving of how to express yourself in another language. So,
Next 10 to 20 years, a lot of the kinds of jobs that these skills require will be replaced by AI. So we really should be
What?
teaching kids to
Okay.
celebrate their creativity.
tell you what, Jordan, when you come up with a general AI, let me know. Until then, I'm going to have to go ahead and say that humans are going to be necessary for quite a long time doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Also, at the 1 hour mark, I need to go because there is I'm at the dorm room, and at this time, it's required to be silent. For audio, so yeah.
Well, I don't want you to get in trouble. So I think what we'll do now is we'll just head to the intermission, and I will see you guys on the other side of it's about 4-minute type intermission. So
All right.
everyone, please stick with me. Please remember to hit like, and yeah, I will see you all in a few minutes.
I want to take a moment to talk about something serious. There is a problem facing late surviving non-avian dinosaurs in modern America. Hunting is very strictly regulated, and only allowed at certain times of the year. This means that for much of the year we have to rely on farm-raised food, which means money. If you want to help a starving dinosaur, please consider donating on Patreon, or buying from my merch store. Links are in the description. Please help. Dinosaurs all over YouTube are depending on you to help them through the hunting off-season.
All right, I am back. I decided not to let it go through the entirety of the intermission because, I want to get back to this. I want to see how much of this I can get done because this is dumb stuff. Here we go.
And come up with genius solutions to human problems, since our ingenuity is what will define us well into the future.
I can generally agree there, yeah. That's fair.
We may also find tremendous value in simply the use of our imagination. For even Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there will ever be to know and understand. So, what does this have to do with enlightenment? To become enlightened is to become more aware of what is, seeing and understanding reality as it currently is, but also how things can work on a higher level with greater and better systems in place.
So, okay, this is one of the things that frustrates me about Jordan. I don't know entirely what he means here. Because if he's saying that enlightenment, which, like I said, has a swath of definitions that are all sort of related to just increasing your level of knowledge or wisdom, then I do think it's fair to say that you could say that part of enlightenment is the ability to do things like recognize the various technological solutions to problems that we have available now, and that we could develop in the future. So you could say that, you have to have a certain level of enlightenment to be, say, an inventor. Okay, I guess that's fair. But then, like, what does that have to do with spiritual light entering into you from beyond the third dimension or some craziness? Like, there's no real connection there. It's just a mystical word salad. So, like, I don't know what to do with it. And yeah, this is one of the things that frustrates me with Jordan. I mean, of course, other things that frustrate me with Jordan is his extremely horrible and horrific criminal activities. So, I mean, there's that. But, yeah, that's what frustrates me about Jordan's videos.
Designed for our own empowerment. In this particular example, enlightenment could be seen as the sudden illumination of the nature of what our current education system is creating, but then using that awareness to speak to this truth and help
What? I can't even follow this nonsense.
transform it into something greater. When you consciously make the choice to seek your true nature, you begin to turn back towards and connect with source energy.
Which you haven't defined. Look, Jordan has trouble defining his terms. He's just said that light is source energy because it was like the first thing after the Big Bang that existed, which isn't quite true, but it's not super far off from true. So your connection to light is what? That it hits you? That your various atoms give it off when your electrons drop in energy level because of black body radiation? I mean, I would really like to understand.
You see, enlightenment begins and takes place within. Across all of these ancient cultures, whether it's Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, or even shamanic traditions, source or God is often described to be known and experienced within. When we allow ourselves to become a living embodiment of...
But light is experienced from outside, right? Like, you can imagine light emanating from within yourself, but I've never met someone who actually glowed in the dark, unless I guess they were covered in glow-in-the-dark paint, but I don't think that's what we're talking about here. So you can imagine finding, or perhaps, you know what, I'm not even going to make a true claim. Maybe you can experience some kind of divine presence internally, which you perceive as some kind of light manifesting within you. But that isn't actually how humans perceive physical light, which is what we're talking about, because remember, Jordan said that spiritual light is light, and humans don't emanate light in the at least in the visible spectrum, right? They have black body radiation. You can see them in an infrared camera. But like, the human interaction with light is primarily through finding light outside of your body, entering into your eyes, and then your brain perceiving that information.
the light that we are, we become a living embodiment of that light. We become enlightened.
Oh, it took a long time. It took a long time for him to get there, but there it is. The stupid etymology. You become light when you're enlightened. No. When something is lightened, that means light is shed upon it, not that it becomes light. And when you are enlightened, you are now in a situation in which light is falling on you. That's the etymological route to take. You can now see clearly because you're in the light, not because you are the light, Jordan. This is... I knew he was going to screw up the etymology. I knew he was going to do something with wordplay. It was stupid, and he did. Yep, the Venerable, you're right. One was correct.
Now, to become truly and fully enlightened, such as the Buddha, it may not be as easy as the illumination of consciousness that we've been describing so far.
I thought it was the same thing as the enlightenment of consciousness you've been describing. What else is it? You've only given one description of enlightenment.
But it is believed that all of us may walk this path, and that means you too. And when you do, you become not just aware of your divine nature, but every one of your actions matches the luminous quality of your soul. This is truly what makes one enlightened, that they live the light, not just know about it or think about it intellectually.
What does that mean practically? Because, I mean, other than, like, swallowing a light bulb, I don't know what it means to live in the light.
Light also exhibits the wave-particle duality. That is, the photons that make it up can behave as both a point-like particle and a wave depending on if they're measured and observed.
Kind of. So an observation quantum mechanics basically means that there's an interaction, right? So two quantum objects interact. And when they interact at that instant, they always interact in point-like fashion or particle-like fashion. However, the path that you can observe things traveling in tends to be wavelength, tends to be wave-like, that's what I meant, in terms of quantum mechanics. So for instance, most people are probably familiar with the famous double slit experiment. In the double slit experiment, you're firing photons or electrons, depending on which version of this you're doing, right? In succession, like one at a time. And they're passing through an area with two open slits. And when they hit the detector at the other end of the experiment from the gun shooting them, they hit as single points, right? You get little dots at the other end. And as time goes by, you build up an interference pattern, which means that the path that each one has traveled has been wave-like in order to determine where it appears. But the final interaction or measurement, which is when the electron or photon hits the photographic plate at the back, is point-like. So that's what wave-particle duality really is. It's not like, yeah, whatever.
The behavior of particles as well-defined points may have a relationship to the reason why this physical reality looks static and feels finite and physical to us. Keep in mind that, following the first law of thermodynamics and the conservation of energy,
the first law of thermodynamics is basically the law of conservation of energy. The law of conservation of energy is just a slightly more generalized term because it doesn't have so much to do with just thermodynamics, but sure, whatever.
Energy can't be destroyed, only transmuted. The energy that was created between the molecules and atoms does not disappear out of existence when something dies. It is simply transmuted into some other form. The atoms that make up you were once part of a dying star, and when you eventually die, the energy and atoms inside you could end up in some distant galaxy thousands of light years away.
Well, first, if it's thousands of light years away, it's not a distant galaxy. Thousands of light years away still puts you firmly inside the Milky Way, whichever direction you're intending to go. But leaving that aside, galaxies are generally gravitationally bound, and so while they do merge, things from one galaxy more or less can't get to any adjacent galaxy except for things like electromagnetic radiation, things that can travel at the speed of light. And even then, it's only going to happen in the very nearby galaxies, right? Because sufficiently distant galaxies, if you were to try to start off right now at the speed of light for them, they would recede beyond the cosmic horizon before you could ever reach them. So you still can't do that. So no, none of your matter or energy is ever likely to end up in a distant galaxy. It's essentially impossible. A nearby galaxy, maybe a little bit. But here's the other thing. The energy in you isn't some kind of mystical, magical soul, right? Now, I'm not saying whether or not there is some spiritual component to people. But when you talk about the physics of light, and you talk about the energy and material that someone has, what they have is chemical, electrical, and thermal energy. So when an organism dies, first, essentially all of the electrical potential ends up being dissipated and then ultimately turned into thermal energy. Then other organisms primarily break down the chemical energy that's present to feed themselves. That's what decomposition largely is. It's decomposing organisms like bacteria, worms, fungi, insects, things like that, eating the dead thing and taking that chemical energy and breaking it down. And that itself turns into thermal energy. And of course, when you die, you're going to quickly reach thermodynamic equilibrium with the environment, so that thermal energy is going to dissipate within a matter of hours. And it's not going to go off to some distant star. It's just going to go into your local environment. That's what's going to happen. So, yeah, it is true that your energy isn't going to be destroyed. It will be eaten by maggots. And if there's a soul, it is not well described by physical energy.
Giving energy to a supernova.
Nope. Supernovas already have all the energy that they're ever going to need in the star in the first place. It's all gravitational potential energy, essentially, right? Because stars get their energy to get really, really hot from converting gravitational potential energy into thermal energy. So that's where it all started. Any star that's currently around has all of its energy seeded from potential. And then it turns into other kinds of energy as it goes.
Spiritually speaking, when our physical body dies, our consciousness is thought to move on as well. Our awareness is transmuted and moves into something new.
Okay, Jordan, that's great, but you cannot describe it by thermodynamic processes. Because thermodynamic processes, which is what you're talking about, are well understood, and they don't involve the soul.
The physical body can decompose, but the true essence of ourselves can't.
How do you know? Maybe, but you can't say that that's something you gain from your knowledge of the physics of light. And that's the thing. I'm not here to contest the, afterlife or anything like that. I don't care, for the purposes of this channel at least, what people here think about the afterlife, or what Jordan thinks about the afterlife. But you cannot compare it to a physical process that is well understood in physics.
So let's bring this back around full circle. Does light decompose? Is that even remotely possible?
Well, no, because when we talk about decomposition, we're talking about the conversion of something from a state where it was just recently alive to a state where it is broken down into its constituent parts by various forces. And if we do analogize that to things like nuclear decay, where a big atom starts to turn into a bunch of little tiny atoms, well, smaller atoms, by giving off like alpha particles or beta particles or neutrons or whatever, right? So that's an analogy, but light is made up of photons, which are fundamental particles and force carriers. They don't decay into anything. They just travel until they hit
Light
something.
can bend, dance, shine, and shimmer. When you break it apart, it becomes a spectrum of color. Considering all things are vibrating at different rates, perhaps the...
Wait, all things are vibrating at different rates. Not everything is even vibrating. I mean, you could say that the atoms make, like, okay, look, I have a stylus here for my tablet, right? If I'm holding it, all of the various atoms in it are vibrating in some sense because they have thermal energy, which means that while on net they're not moving, they are moving back and forth with some kind of kinetic energy. But the pen as a whole has no overall vibration unless I choose to put it on something that's vibrating, right? And in which case, it now has a vibration in terms of its locomotion and as well as its acceleration and speed, and I guess jerk if you want to take the, the second derivative, no, third derivative of location. So, yeah, but things don't just have a vibration because you say so. And the vibration that most physical objects would have doesn't have anything to do in particular with the wavelength or frequency of light.
The light energy that creates your being too is just a creation of consciousness within a field of possibilities, with you at the very center.
What? That's just word salad. I'm not even sure what he just said. I'm going to listen to that again without interrupting to see if I can even comprehend the point he's trying to make.
Considering all things are vibrating at different rates, perhaps the light energy that creates your being too is just a creation of consciousness within a field of possibilities, with you at the very center.
Nope. That sounds like absolute gibberish. Okay, here's a fun thing, right? There's this website. I believe it's called Wisdom of Chopra. We're going to take a look at it. Okay, Wisdom of Chopra. So, here's the thing. Deepak Chopra is another guy like Jordan. He's a bit more like old media type, where he doesn't do a whole lot of like YouTube stuff. He like writes books and hosts seminars and whatnot, right? But the thing is that his tweets and whatnot, his little random sound bites that he gives, are just completely meaningless. And so there's a website called wisdomofchopra.com, which gives you randomly generated nonsense quotes from Deepak Chopra using keywords that he likes. So, for instance, I just went to the website now, and it says, "The physical world is in the midst of formless chaos." Okay, sure. You hit refresh, now it says, "Existence alleviates ephemeral success." Okay, doesn't really mean anything. "A formless void relies on objective actions. The true identity opens positive possibilities." All of this is just randomly generated nonsense that sounds deep. That's all that statement from Jordan was. Like, I could probably write a spirit science video by relying almost entirely on fake Deepak Chopra quotes. Here's another one. Your desire results from boundless boundaries. Sure, sounds cool.
During space with the rest of the universe. Enlightenment is understanding that you are not your thoughts, but the awareness of the thoughts themselves. It is
Okay, look. I get that from a philosophical standpoint, the conception of the self is tricky, but I'm not sure what the practical distinction between thinking of yourself as your thoughts and thinking of yourself as the thing that is aware of the thoughts. Like, I really don't know what meaningful distinction we can draw there. And Jordan is so adept at saying things that don't mean anything that I'm not sure that he has a conception of that either.
understanding that you have a right to exist because you do exist, and so does everything and everyone else in existence. It is knowing and seeing truth, which is everything that is without any preconceived ideas or stories being put on top of these circumstances.
What? Okay, look. I think that what true is one of a few things. It is either things that conform to what actually exists in reality, or it is those things which follow logically within a particular defined system like mathematics, right? So while it's true that math doesn't need to adhere to any part of physical reality in order for it to be true, because it is its own self-contained system, you can have things that are true about that system. And you could come up with other systems about which you can prove things. And so those things that you can prove are true about that system. So those are the two options for truth. I don't think it has anything to do with that which doesn't have biases put on top of it, right? Because you can put all sorts of biases on top of math. As long as your proof works, it's still true, whatever your bias is.
Enlightenment is shining your truth, sharing your light, expressing yourself, and consciously participating in reality in the highest way possible.
I mean, look, okay, expressing yourself, trying to participate in an ethical and productive manner in the world around you, these are all great things, right? Do those things. Be a positive influence on those around you. Be nice to people, be generous, be kind. All of that is great. I'm not going to tell you not to do that. Everyone should be like that. I say that as someone who sort of, I've talked about this before, right? Like, part of my own personal system of ethics involves trying to incorporate elements of virtue ethics in order to guide my actions above and beyond what I would consider the bare minimum. Because my bare minimum, like what you absolutely have to avoid doing or do of obligation in order to avoid being someone who should be essentially like restrained physically, is pretty low, right? But I think the kind of things you should do to be a praiseworthy person are it's a considerably higher bar. And I like to try to be a praiseworthy person. And all those are things that fall in line with that. So from my personal standpoint of ethics, yes, good advice. But I don't know what it has to do with light or source energy or the afterlife. Like, none of this actually seems to be making any connection. Or sharing your light. What is this spiritual light? Apparently we can't measure it.
It is choosing growth over stagnation, even if it causes you discomfort.
What Boyo says, wait, I can make a clay cup? No, you can only find stock footage on a stock footage website of someone else making a clay cup. That's the trick. That's another sneaky bit from Jordan. You're not actually allowed to make your own clay cup. Only stock footage actors may do that.
It is asking questions and questioning the answers, and always asking more questions. It's making decisions and then letting go and trusting that decision. Acknowledging when you've made a mistake and hurt someone, or broke something and then cleaning up your mess. It's taking responsibility for yourself in all your actions. It's also the understanding that you're not alone and that anything is possible. That the kingdom of earth is all around you and the kingdom of heaven is within.
Oh. Okay. Again, taking responsibility for your actions, being able to be decisive, being considerate, all of this is good stuff, but I don't know what it has to do with light. And I don't know what the kingdom of earth is all around you, but the kingdom of heaven is within means, right? So kingdom of heaven is primarily a term that you're going to get from like Christian theology. And it isn't something that's primarily inside you, although when you, in Christian theology, receive the Holy Spirit, that is some part of the kingdom of heaven that's now residing inside you, but it's primarily composed of, spiritual creatures like the angels, God, as well as other Christians, right? Which means it is primarily external to you. So when you import this Christian term into New Age mysticism without giving me any idea as to what it means, and then you just say it's inside you, the only reasonable conclusion that I can come to is that you don't know what you're talking about, right? The kingdom of heaven is not, at least in Christian theology, which is where the term comes from, primarily an internal phenomenon. It is an external thing to you, which has aspects of it which are dwelling within you in some spiritual sense.
And by living in a life of love and creative wonder, we can bring heaven to earth.
But I thought heaven was inside you, so do you have to turn inside out? Who knows?
Now, moving forward from there, the universe is
From where? From a bunch of word salad followed by be nice to each other? Okay, sure.
crazy big, and we understand that it's expanding. To us here on Earth, it definitely seems like it just goes on forever, both in time and in space.
I mean, does it? Because the cosmic horizon is at a real defined distance from Earth. So, in that sense, it doesn't really seem like it's keeps going on forever. Because there's an end to how far we can see.
Of course, in both science and religion, creation is often discussed from the perspective of having a beginning. The standard scientific model for the birth of the cosmos goes something like this. Nearly 14 billion years ago, a tremendous amount
Yeah, sure. Nearly 14 billion.
of energy materialized as if out of nowhere. In a brief moment of rapid expansion, that burst of energy inflated the cosmos like a balloon. The expansion straightened out any big curves.
The expansion straightened out any big curves. I don't know what that means. So here's the thing, right? Right now, it looks like the universe is very slightly open, so it isn't actually curved in on itself. In fact, it's curved slightly away from itself. Very nearly flat, but just ever so slightly open, or negatively curved. But there's no indication that the universe was ever positively curved, right? So in the Big Bang, in cosmology, there's this thing you have to talk about called scale factor, right? And scale factor, it's hard to think about because at like a Newtonian level that we all work on, there isn't really a great analog for scale factor. But the way to think of scale factor is it's set at a value of 1 right now. And so if you think about any one point in space-time and any other distant point in space-time and how distant they are in that space-time, that tells you what distance they're going to be at current scale factor. As you wind the clock backwards, the scale factor starts to go down from 1, so it starts to approach towards 0 as you get close to the Big Bang. And so what you can do is you can multiply that space-time difference between those 2 points to figure out how far away they would be at any given time in the past, based on what we see as the increase rate in scale factor. So very close to the Big Bang, 2 points that are currently, say 14,000 light years away would have been extremely close. However, when you uniformly reduce the scale factor of the universe, that doesn't change its shape, right? It will remain open or closed and curved to whatever degree. So for instance, currently, we're pretty sure the universe is slightly open. So that likely would have been the case throughout the entire history of the universe, right from the very beginning. It would have started as a slightly open universe. So in order for the Big Bang to have straightened something out, in addition to just changing the scale factor, which is really pretty much what we think the Big Bang is, it's mostly just a change in the scale factor, it also would have actually had to change the geometry of the universe. But there's no evidence that it did, and it certainly didn't have to. So this just sounds like Jordan making stuff up.
Leading to a largely geometrically flat plane. Before all the flat earthers jump up and down, though, let us explain.
I'm glad that he realized that he might have just been given aid and comfort to flurfs. Oh, Jordan.
What we mean by geometrically flat here is whether 2 beams of light shooting side by side through space will stay parallel forever, rather than eventually crossing and swinging back around to where they started.
Okay, so that's not all. Well, I'm going to let him finish the sentence because maybe he's going to get there. I don't want to preempt him.
As it would be the case in a closed universe. If all the matter and energy in the universe...
Okay, so yeah, that's part of the answer, right? In a flat region of space-time that's perfectly flat, two beams of light traveling in the same direction at a certain distance from each other that were like laser-like, right? So you just have photons going in a particular direction. They're not spreading out. Now, we can't really make that, but it's just a thought experiment. You don't have to worry about too much the physical reality of making this kind of thing. So in a flat region of space-time, those laser pointers would continue to run parallel to each other, going in the same direction the whole way, right? Now, if you had a region where space-time is positively curved, then they would in fact curve towards each other, and they might even come back to their starting point. That's possible. But you can also have a negatively curved space-time, which is what it looks like the universe is overall. Now, in this case, the beams, rather than continue to travel in the same direction, would not curve towards each other, but would end up actually going away from each other. So they would not stay equidistant like they would in a flat universe. Instead, their distance from each other would slowly increase over time as they move away from each other. So it's not like the options are flat or positive curvature, right? The options are positive curvature, flat, and negative curvature. And it looks like the universe is in fact open, ever so slightly.
including dark matter and dark energy, at which the energy of the outward expansion balances the energy of inward gravitational pull, space will extend flatly in all directions.
But the thing is that the energy density in the universe as a whole of dark energy seems to be increasing because the acceleration rate of the universe, the speed at which the scale factor is increasing, seems to itself be increasing. There is an acceleration. So it is not the case that gravitational energy is currently equaling out with net dark energy to come up with a net zero. It actually looks like we're having a net negative sum of energy, which is itself a bit mysterious. Generally speaking, one of the big ideas behind cosmogony has been that one of the ways that you can sort of get around the potential problem of the Big Bang seeming like it's violating the first law is that if you get a vector sum of all energy in the universe, if it sums to zero, well then who cares about the first law? No energy was ultimately created or destroyed. Because we know in certain aspects of physics, you can have what are called virtual particles which appear, which have exactly opposite energy, and which then can annihilate, resulting again in a net zero energy. So in that sense, essentially the universe could itself just be essentially a bunch of virtual particles that are very persistent, but still sum out to essentially zero energy. But it's not clear how that works with the increasing dark energy that we're seeing. So, you know, this is where we're getting into like big questions in cosmology that I don't have an answer for. I'm never going to get the answer for them. At best, I might be able to kind of understand the answer when someone else gets it.
Naturally, though, gravity acts as a force that curves the universal plane around heavy objects, so it doesn't always appear as a plane.
There is no such thing as the universal plane, right? I think this is just Jordan taking things like the rubber sheet analogy that I used earlier and taking it way too literally, as if space-time is actually some kind of sheet of rubber that can deform. It's not. These deformations are across all three dimensions as well as time. It's a four-dimensional manifold, not some plane.
And shortly after the Big Bang, matter got squished together so that the cosmos appeared largely, if not perfectly, featureless. Here and there, clumps of particles.
Okay, so that is actually, generally speaking, true, right? Very early on, actually even to this day, the universe at a large enough scale essentially is homogeneous, right? Humans and galaxies happen to be both, despite their themselves much different scales, at small enough scales where everything looks clumpy and heterogeneous. But at a large enough scale, the universe is more or less homogeneous. And at the big, early on in the history of the universe, shortly after the initial expansion of the Big Bang, it's true that it would have been homogeneous at much, much smaller scales because the universe itself was still at a smaller scale. But again, at even smaller scales, it wouldn't have been homogeneous. So that's what's actually going on there.
Created galaxies and stars. But to be honest, these are just minuscule specks on an otherwise unblemished cosmic canvas.
I mean, kinda. It is true that, generally speaking, the distance between galaxies is significantly bigger than the galaxies themselves in terms of, like, any one dimension. But it's also the case that like the difference in scale is also much, much less than the difference in scale, say, between stars and the whole galaxy, right? So stars are, compared to their size, extremely distant from each other. Much more so, there's a much bigger difference between the size of a star and the distance between them in a galaxy than there is between the size of a galaxy and the distance between galaxies. So the universe as a whole, when you're taking the galaxies as the units that you're looking at, is actually pretty full of stuff. It's much more full of stuff than if you look at a galaxy and think of the stars as the units that you're measuring. So it's only kind of right to say that the universe is mostly nothing speckled with bits of stuff. Because you can also think about that with atoms, right? Like, the vast majority of the space of any solid object is actually empty space with tiny little atoms stuck here and there. Does that mean that, a solid chunk of ice is mostly empty nothing with tiny specks of water scattered throughout it? I mean, I guess. It's a weird way to put it, and I don't think it is really helpful to think of it that way, but it's true in a certain way. You can describe it from that perspective. It's just weird.
Now, in esoteric philosophy, the whole process is generally called...
Okay, there is not one thing that's esoteric philosophy, right? So esotericism, or esoteric philosophies, are philosophies in which some aspects of the teaching is concealed from students until the teachers judge that they're ready for it, right? So this is common in certain religions. For instance, famously, Scientology is extremely esoteric. Many aspects of that religion, which... Look, I'm not going to argue over whether it's a religion. I'm just going to call it a religion because it has religious aspects, and it is esoteric no matter what else it is. So many teachings from that religion are only revealed after someone has advanced to a certain level. And in fact, there are warnings in the writings of Scientology that giving certain knowledge to people who aren't ready could be harmful or even fatal, right? So that's esoteric. But the esoteric philosophies of Scientology aren't the same as the esoteric philosophies of Hermeticism, and those aren't the same as the esoteric philosophies of Kabbalah, and they're not the same as the esoteric philosophies of Hesychasm in Christianity. Like, there's a lot of esoteric philosophies out there that are not the same as each other. There is no such thing as esoteric philosophy as a single philosophy.
Emanationism. This is the idea that consciousness or some all-present energy created everything by expanding outwards through the planes of existence.
Well, here's a great example. So, emanations are an idea that is present in some aspects of Gnostic Christian philosophy. There's a different kind of association of emanations in Kabbalah, but it doesn't really map super well onto that in Gnostic Christianity. Hermeticism has yet a different kind of sort of emanation, which might be closer to the Gnosticism. But then you get into, like, say, the esoteric philosophy, like I said, of Scientology. There really isn't a sense of emanations in the same way. So it varies.
Gaining greater degrees of density as it trickled down to the physical.
Nope, it has nothing to do with density. Jordan just likes to think of density as becoming, like, dumber. Like, he thinks that because you call people who are thick-headed dense, that apparently that means that dense things are less spiritual. I don't know, but that is nonsense. So if we take sort of stereotypical Gnostic ideas, and I first want to preface this with, I know that basically our entire knowledge of Christian Gnosticism comes from polemics against it, and that means that it's a biased source, and we cannot completely take those Christian sources at their word because they are writing against the Gnostics. We have a very limited set of literature from Gnostic sects themselves that has survived or has been rediscovered. So it's not clear to what degree what I'm about to say actually would correlate to their beliefs of, say, 2nd or 3rd or even 4th or 5th century Gnostic Christians. But it is the ideas that have survived down to us and where people like Jordan tend to get their ideas. So you have a supreme God who is purely spiritual and has absolutely no physicality to it. And from its own perfection and light and awesomeness, I guess, it emanates a first generation of things that are caused by it. And these things are not the pure spirit that the one monad is, right? but they're not quite material yet. But they tend to represent certain fundamental aspects of the spiritual reality that Gnostics think that they inhabit. So one might embody, rationality and rational thought. Another one might embody justice. It varies based on exactly which theology you're looking at. But then eventually those things themselves emanate other things. And the way that it usually follows is you can think of it as sort of like certain concepts, and things that are an emanation embody a concept, and then they emanate things that are subsets of that concept. And eventually you get down to one emanation which embodies concepts that have to do with the various negative aspects of your spiritual life. And then it creates the limited, mundane, material world as an act, essentially, of rebellion. And there you go. That's how we get the physical world. It has nothing to do with density. You're not going to find that as a theme in Gnostic works generally.
In Kabbalah, it is explained as restrictions upon the infinite light, Ein Sof Or, which allowed for the density of matter to come into being from lighter substances. Let's take a step outside the box for a second, though, and put these two sides of the cosmic coin into a Vesica Pisces. As usual, the two...
Is Vesica Pisces woo peddler talk for Venn diagram? Because I'm seeing a Venn diagram. Let me know in the chat if you know whether or not Vesica Pisces is anything besides just woo speech for Venn diagram.
Opposites that never got along actually have quite a lot in common. Both science and spirituality say that the universe began unified and expanded outwards. Both say that light or charge were an important factor in creation.
I'll let it go.
If at the beginning of the universe all emerged from one essence and became everything...
But that's the thing. Emerging from a more or less smooth cloud of energy isn't the same as emerging from an essence, right? Physics doesn't have anything to say about essences, right? That isn't a meaningful term in Big Bang.
Then both are saying the same thing, that we come from the same source. But wait a second.
I mean, kind of. It is true that according to the Big Bang, everything ultimately derives from the energy that was there at essentially, the instant after t equals 0. So I guess that's the same source, but everything came from a slightly different part of it. So I don't know. Is it the same source then? Oh, Vesica Pisces is the pointed oval you get in the Venn diagram, but it's also just a shape. Okay. There you go.
How can we make sense out of the statement, the universe is infinite, if we are measuring it from a sense of having a beginning or an end?
Well, first, I don't actually make the claim that the universe is infinite. I suspect it might be. But scientists generally don't make that as a positive claim because we don't have a way to test whether or not the universe is infinite.
As it may seem, the answer is in the cycles. Cycles are everywhere. The way in which we live our lives is made up of cycles, and we have both natural cycles and technological ones. Natural and biological cycles exist built into the universe and the creation process of life.
I mean, okay.
Technological cycles are cycles that we've created and superimposed over top of other natural cycles as a way of measuring and understanding the world that we live in. Time is a perfect example of this. In order to calculate time, you must have speed and distance.
No, that's actually not true. In fact, time is actually, like, the SI unit second is not actually defined in terms of a speed or a distance. It's actually defined in terms of vibration, which Jordan should like. But, yeah, you actually just need something that changes in order to measure time, and you need for the duration of that change to be something that is regular. And once you have that, then you can measure time. Now, there are other ways to measure time, but the problem with saying that you need to measure time using speed and distance is that speed already uses units of time, so you can't define time that way. Jordan's idea about how to measure time is literally impossible. You have to have a measurement of time to measure speed in the first place. So no, you can't measure time itself using speed and distance, because without being able to measure time first, you couldn't measure the speed. So, you know what, this isn't a drinking game, but I'm just going to drink because of how mind-meltingly stupid that statement was.
But due to the uncertainty principle, when you get down to the subatomic, we can't know an object's position and speed together, as if we know one,
It's not position and speed. It's position and momentum. Momentum isn't speed, right? Now, if you know something's mass and its momentum, and you have the vector associated with that momentum, then you can calculate its speed. But yeah, the uncertainty principle regards position and momentum.
the other will spiral off into uncertainty and infinity.
Infinity and uncertain. Okay, look. Let's say that you have. You can't really, but let's just say, for the sake of the thought experiment, you measure a particle's position extremely precisely, with infinite precision. You now have absolutely no ability to determine anything about its momentum. However, it will not have an infinite momentum because that isn't one of the options, right? Even things that travel at the speed of light have a relativistic momentum that is finite. So depending on what you measured, it can only ever have up to a certain limit of momentum in terms of the value of the momentum. It can have any value for the vector that's associated with that momentum, but its actual momentum cannot be infinite because that's literally impossible. This is kind of exhausting.
So time can't be an intrinsic property of matter. It's simply a measurement of some other cycles.
Yeah, time isn't an intrinsic property of matter. It is the duration of events. Who's making the claim that it's who is Jordan arguing with here? That's what I want to know.
You could think of it as a measuring tool, such as an hour worth of this, or I'll meet you at 6. In the past, we've said it differently, like, let's gather again at the next moon cycle. Another example.
Yeah, in the past we used less precise but still easily observable cycles to talk about time because it's all we had. And I don't know what significance that has, but okay.
Of technological cycles could include anything from our calendars to minutes and seconds, or even more obscure things like life cycles of video game consoles.
You think Jordan knows that calendars are based on natural cycles, like, the cycle of the Earth around the sun? I don't know. I don't think that just noticing a physical, natural time cycle and then subdividing it is sufficient to call that an artificial time measurement device.
Some of them, like our year-long calendar count, is our interpretation of a natural cycle.
Okay,
the
so he
Earth
does
orbiting
know.
around the sun. Others, like video game consoles, are completely based on our modern world, such as current technology, the economy, buyer's demand, and what have you.
But the thing is, though, that all of those are still ultimately built on physical cycles. So, for instance, your computer has to cycle based on a few things. One is it has its input, which in the US is going to be 60 hertz, right? And then that's going to be felt through a rectifier. But there's still going to be actually, in that case, there might be a 120 hertz cycle, depending on exactly how the rectifier is working. If there's like a full bridge rectifier, then it's going to double whatever the hertz is from the actual wall. But then within that, if you're putting it through a rectifier that then smooths out that cycle so that it's basically getting a constant DC voltage out, then you're going to have... okay. Feel free to laugh at this. It's going to be great. But you're going to essentially have what are things called multivibrators, which are electronic cyclers that can take constant input and result in a cycle to establish things like clock ticks. But that's going to still be based on the physical assembly of the vibrator, right? So I don't know what it means for it to be like artificial or something. It's still all based on things in the physical world. The Earth orbiting the sun isn't any more or less spiritual or technological or something. It's just physics, right? And technology is just humans taking physics and doing stuff with it. I really don't like this division of the world into the natural and the artificial. The artificial is just humans using nature in very specific ways that probably wouldn't happen without humans.
Biological cycles are natural. They happen in relationship to each other and are much more harmonious than the cycles we've often created.
What does it mean for them to be harmonious? Okay, So, correct me if I'm wrong, musicians, but last I checked, for two things to be in harmony, their frequencies have to be whole number ratios of each other. So, are the biological cycles more likely to be in whole number ratios relationships than technological cycles? Because I just mentioned that if you put 60 hertz AC through a full bridge rectifier, it comes out as 120 hertz with actually only one directionality. So it comes out as DC, but it goes up and down in voltage at a cycle of 120 hertz. That's in harmony. So, what, like, I don't understand how Jordan would either know or measure this, or even what it means in some cases for them to be in harmony. I think what he means is people feel peaceful when they go out into nature, therefore nature is harmonious in a different sense. Therefore, he's going to use the equivocation fallacy to bring that kind of harmony and bring it over from a different area, like musical harmony, where you're talking about the actual harmony that exists in different frequencies of sound, and then just apply it to like circadian rhythms and annual life cycles of animals and plants and stuff. But that's just basically like stream of consciousness nonsense, where you're just taking essentially unrelated things and just plugging them together because your language happens to use similar words to describe them. Yeah.
The tree doesn't think, is it time to bear fruit yet? I'm just not sure. I think I'll hold off because I'm afraid no one's going to eat the fruit. Right? In nature,
Yes, trees don't have brains. Instead, they respond to physical stimuli using hormones, which trigger various biological functions.
the tree just does it. It knows by its inherent instructions what it's supposed to do, for it's living by its natural design. Other natural cycles could include solar and lunar cycles, the 4 seasons, and the bears that hibernate. If you recall from our episode about the shift to the age of Aquarius, we could map it like this. There are smaller cycles within the larger cycles.
Now, see, this is actually an example of harmony, right? So you have a large cycle at the beginning, and then you have another thing that is at a 1 to 2 ratio, and then another one that's at a 4 to 1 ratio. This is, in fact, harmony. But I don't have any evidence that natural cycles tend to line up this way. So, for instance, circadian cycles are not in harmony with the annual cycles because there isn't an even, a whole number of days in an annual cycle, right? So the Earth takes 365.254 or something like that days to go around the sun, which means that literally circadian rhythms cannot be in harmony with the annual cycle of the Earth, because it would have to be whole number ratios, but it isn't. So even some of the most basic natural cycles aren't in harmony if you're using harmony in terms of frequency and wavelength, like Jordan seems to want to.
Like our celestial cycle, we find it broken up into the 4 seasons, and inside of that,
Now, I will say, the seasons are actually not in harmony either, because they don't all take the same amount of time, and that's because Earth's orbit is elliptical. Now, they take very close to the same amount of time for each season, right? It's not a huge difference. Like in Mars, which has a much more elliptical orbit, the seasons are more disparate in their length. But they're still disparate in their length on Earth because of the elliptical orbit, right? And which ones are longer or shorter changes with things like the precession of the equinox, which Jordan is very well aware of. So even the 4 seasons cycle isn't actually in harmony with the annual cycle.
we have the cycles of the rest of life on Earth, all doing their thing in relationship with each other, which are both
But not in whole number ratios, so it's not in harmony.
influenced by and influence the larger cycle. Sometimes it may not seem like
Okay, I want to know how it is that Jordan thinks that, the circadian rhythms of, say, whiptail lizards that are in the backyard here, I want to know how those affect the natural cycle of the Earth orbiting the sun. Because I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there is no way that he could demonstrate that the circadian rhythm of a bunch of lizards in my yard affect the orbit of the Earth around the sun.
the smaller cycles have influence on the larger ones, but everything is connected. If you ever feel like you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping in a room with a mosquito.
Ha ha ha. Now, I will say this. Look, while you may or may not be able to make some big change on the world stage. You do matter, and you can make a difference, even if it's a local difference, right? Like, be nice to someone. You just made a difference in that person's life. So this is going to be Dapper being, doing a wide sage thing. Now, this is a story that I don't remember where it came from, but I'm going to retell it, right? So there's a guy who's on the beach, and he notices an elderly man walking around the beach and picking up sea stars and tossing them back in the water after they've been stranded by high tide, and it's on a particularly hot, sunny day. And so the sea stars are going to dry out if they just stay up above the high tide line, or, well, near the high tide line. So the guy who's noticing this, he approaches the old man and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm saving these starfish." He's like, "But the beach is so big, and there's so many starfish in such a hot day that you can't possibly save all of them. What difference does it gonna make? You're going to make a tiny difference." And the old man just picks up one of the starfish, is going to toss back in the water, and he says, "It's going to make a difference to this one." And that's the thing. Even if you can't be the guy who changes history, right? You can be the person who changes the lives of people around you for the better. And I think that's worth doing. So do that if you can, when you can. Just make that difference. It doesn't have to be that you're going to make some giant societal overturning. Being a positive influence on the lives of those around you, I think, is enough for most people to strive for.
Another example of using microcycles to shift your own larger ones is daily meditation. Meditate once and yeah, you'll feel all right, I guess, but it's a new thing and whatever, right? But meditate every day for a few weeks and you'll really start to notice that mental fog clearing up, and you'll be more focused and alert than ever before.
Okay, I cannot say that I entirely agree with Jordan's claim that basically you're just going to get clarity of vision and be better at thinking and whatnot if you meditate daily. However, I will say this. I have read actual medical studies claiming that meditation can help with certain like mental illnesses, like it can help with depression and anxiety and things like that. So I do actually think that meditating is a good idea, and it doesn't have to be some big spiritual exercise. One thing I recommended to friends before is when they're feeling extremely stressed or anxious or something like that, just sit in a quiet room and concentrate on your own breathing and intentionally breathe in and out. Do something like the in through the nose, out through the mouth. And the reason isn't because that there's some, inner light that you're going to experience spiritually, and then you're going to ascend to higher dimensions and it will clear off the fog of this dense universe. It's none of that. It's just that when your brain is going crazy thinking about all the horrible stuff that could happen, but that probably won't, but you aren't able to really internalize that. These things are not reasonable fears. Instead, if you take your mind off of it by thinking on something that you can do peacefully, it will help you calm down. And then once that sort of like storm in your brain has kind of eased off a bit, you can come away from it calmer and better able to approach your problems and the problems of the day in a rational manner that isn't panicking. So do meditate, even if it's just as simple as just taking a moment to just be at peace and concentrate on your breathing, right? You don't have to chant a mantra, although they can help because, again, it's something that takes your conscious mind off of whatever's bothering you. So yeah, go ahead and meditate. I'm not going to ever tell anyone not to meditate. It can help with a lot of things. So, but I think with that, we're actually going to leave this off. We are only at 20 minutes and 13 seconds, and there is how much of this? Yeah, over a minute 22. So it'll be a while. Thank you, everyone who came. Remember, please do like the video. It really does help the channel out. It helps me get a wider viewership in the algorithm, because you gotta remember, one of the only ways the channel is going to grow is if YouTube shows my content to people who aren't already subscribed. And right now it doesn't do that a whole lot, but if we can get it to do more of that, then it will increase my channel growth. In fact, every once in a while I hear YouTubers complaining about how, 70% of my channel viewers aren't subscribed. That's good. That means YouTube is showing your content to people who aren't yet subscribed. So right now that isn't happening. My YouTube videos are viewed maybe around 20% by non-channel by non-subscribers. I want to try to get that up there. So every like and comment that you give helps with that, because YouTube seeing that my content is engaging. But also, if you want to more directly help, I will be playing the end credits soon, and it will be telling you how. And remember, links to help with that kind of stuff are below this video. So here comes the end credits. Thank you very much for coming. Real quick stuff. Next week was originally going to be Eric with Erica, but Erica is helping her family out, so it'll be Kent with Bent. I should have Science Side up on for that episode, as well as Benthoven. Then Eric with Erica is hopefully going to be the week after that. This Thursday, I guess, will be the next episode of Canadian Young Earth Creationism. Then Saturday will be, I think, another one of these, or maybe nothing, because I will have family in the area, so who knows there. But then the Saturday after that, I'm going to try and have Sal Cordova on for him to himself debunk the second law of thermodynamics precludes evolution idea, because Sal Cordova knows far too much about thermodynamics to accept that idea, even while being himself a young Earth creationist. So with that, I'm going to hit the end credits, and I will talk to all of you guys, hopefully, on Tuesday.
I just want to take a second to thank my channel members and patrons, especially those pledging $20 and above. Bob Knob, Benthoven, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, Patrick Dennis, and Res Instance. My channel members and patrons help make this channel possible, and without their support, this channel really wouldn't exist. If you would like to help support the channel as a member or patron, there are links in the description to both join the channel as well as join the Patreon. Patrons and members get mentioned in these credit scenes, as well as getting early access to my scripted videos, and if you pledge $10 or above, you can also get access to various 3D assets that I create for Blender, both for use in the channel, as well as just general giveaways to my supporters to help in any Blender projects they might have. If a monthly or annual pledge isn't for you, then there is also a merch store linked in the description, and if none of that's right for you, please just like and subscribe, because every like and subscription really helps the video out. Thank you.